The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. From that time on, Jesus began to say plainly to his disciples, "I must go to Jerusalem and suffer much from the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. I will be put to death, but 3 days later I will be raised to life." Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "God forbid it, Lord," he said. "This must never happen to you." Jesus turned around and said to Peter, "Get away from me, Satan. You are an obstacle in my way, because these thoughts of yours don't come from God, but from human nature." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If any of you want to come with me, you must forget yourself. Carry your cross and follow me. For if you want to save your own life, you will lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake, you will find it. Will you gain anything if you win the whole world but lose your life? Of course not. There is nothing you can give to regain your life. For the Son of Man is about to come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will reward each one according to his deeds. I assure you that there are some here who will not die until they have seen the Son of Man come as King." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Well, I am standing here in the pulpit with our processional cross right next to me. That's on purpose. It may look a little different. Usually it's over here more to the side. With this passage focusing on the cross, I really wanted to talk about that. But let's remember where we are. It's been a while since we've been in Matthew's Gospel. Our passage begins with the words, "From this time on." What is the time that they're talking about? Well, just previously, that when Jesus was in the territory near Caesarea Philippi, he asked the disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they respond with all kinds of answers, from a great prophet, Elijah, John the Baptist. And Jesus says, "But what about you? Who do you say I am?" And that's when Simon Peter has his famous confession. Simon Peter says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." It's the first time any of the disciples really kind of get it. It kind of clicks with them. This is the long-promised Messiah. This is not only a Messiah, it is the Messiah that is also the Son of the living God. And Jesus at that point praises Peter, Simon Peter, tells him that this wasn't his own insight that made him understand this. This was actually a gift from God, that Peter understood who Jesus is. And he even calls Peter the rock on which he'll build the church. He's going to give him the keys of heaven, and it's a pretty high moment for Peter. And it's from that time, that lofty confession, that lofty understanding of who Jesus is, that then Jesus starts to tell them what he, the Messiah, must undergo: the cross. Peter can't handle it. Everything he understood about the fulfillment of God's promises, the salvation of the people, everything he understood was it was going to be about security, about influence, about power, about restoration of the golden age of Israel, the restoration of the kingdom of David. Jesus is saying something very different here. "God forbid it, Lord," Peter says. "This must never happen to you." And Jesus says something that we read earlier in Matthew's Gospel. Other translations have it, "Get behind me, Satan," or "Get away from me." That's what Jesus says to Satan when he's being tempted in the wilderness after his baptism. Again, Satan was tempting Jesus with issues around security and power and influence. And Jesus says, "Get away from me, Satan." That's not the way of God. That's not what's going to happen this time. Let's think about this cross, the symbol I almost feel like I have to stand behind it so you can see it better on camera. You all have crosses, I'm sure. I've got a smaller one here. This one's made out of olive wood, and it's from Jerusalem. Some people wear crosses as jewelry. They're called a pectoral cross when you wear it on your chest. Bishops are given one of these when they go into office. Sometimes we have acolytes wear them, other pastors, other people. Maybe you have a small silver one that you wear as jewelry. Maybe you have a cross on a wall in your home. I have one in my study here in church. But what does this mean? What does this represent? It is kind of the central symbol of our Christian faith. One of the trivia questions on our scavenger hunt was how many crosses, metal crosses, are permanently affixed to the outside of Calvary Lutheran Church? Do you remember the answer, those that played? It's 13 of them. 13 of them. One of them is on top of our steeple. It's a powerful symbol, but what does it represent? I used to wear a cross 8th, 9th grade quite often. I was one of those kids that just loved going to Bible camp, and the gift store there sold kind of a rugged-looking wooden cross on a leather thong, and I wore it all summer. And I met a camp counselor there that really had a big impact on my life. He was from Ethiopia. He was a student at one of the colleges in Iowa, and he would be going back to Ethiopia, but a man of very strong faith. And he was telling me that in his home country at this time, this was in the 1970s, there would be people that would wear a cross, but it would only be for show, that they weren't very genuine in their faith. And he said, I don't ever wear a cross because I want to live a life that people can tell I'm a Christian without the symbol being attached or the label on me. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want you to stop wearing your crosses. People find that sometimes it's an invitation to conversation for people. But I want to talk about what the meaning of this cross is and how we would live our lives to exemplify its meaning. Now, we don't have to get into the different atonement theories to understand, I think, what the cross means at its core essence. And that is this, that there is no limit to God's love. That the cross, that Christ's death on the cross, foremost is a symbol, an event, a cosmic reality that shows to the world that there is no place that is beyond God's love. There is no place of human suffering that is not beyond God's presence and God's redeeming love. Christ died once over 2,000 years ago, but that death is cosmic and timeless. In that time and place, God embraced all of human suffering. That on the cross and in Matthew's gospel, just like Mark's gospel, the only thing Jesus says from the cross is, my God, why have you forsaken me? In some ways, we could say that this cross really was hell. Because Jesus, at least, was feeling the complete absence of God, and that's the classic definition of hell, where God is not present. So we could say that even hell and all the hellish places and times in our lives has already been embraced by God's limitless love and has been shot through with God's grace. That's what this cross and all the crosses that we have represents. God's unending love, God's limitless grace, God's enduring mercy for all people, not just for Christians, not just for those who bear the cross, but for all children of God created in all time and places. So that's the invitation that Jesus makes to the disciples. Yes, it may have something to do with suffering, but I think it has a lot more to do with following the way of Jesus. You know, before Christians were called Christians, at least in a part of the ancient world, they were known as the people of the way. The way of Jesus. People of the way. That's what Jesus is inviting us into when he says to forget about ourselves, as the Good News Translation says, to pick up our crosses and to follow him. You know, this particular cross is actually called a processional cross. And when it's used in a procession in worship, there will be often torchbearers, people carrying candles in front of it, but it's always the cross itself is at the head of the procession, coming before the leaders of the worship service or the choir or the act, whatever else comes up. The cross, the processional cross, always leads the procession. Likewise, at the end of the service, at the recession, it's the last thing to leave the space. It's the Alpha and the Omega. We are to follow Jesus. And by following Jesus, we will emulate Jesus. We will do what Jesus has done. I've said it 100 times here, I'm sure, that my favorite commissioning among the four Gospels is from John, chapter 20, 21. The resurrected Jesus appears to the disciples and breathes on them. It's a type of Pentecost in John's Gospel. He breathes on them and says, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." Everything Jesus has done, the healing, the forgiveness, the mercy, the love, is our work, our ministry. This is not easy. I don't have to tell you how difficult times are today in our world. I almost don't like turning on the news, whether it's the radio or the TV or on the smartphone. There is so much pain and suffering. There's violence here on our own streets in America as well as around the world. There is injustice. There is discrimination. There is violent reaction when peace should prevail. There is political turmoil, to say the least. We're ready to tear each other apart, whether we wear a mask or not. I've watched parts of both political conventions, and it doesn't look good for peace and harmony and understanding in our country anytime soon. But the way of Jesus, the way of the cross, is to see that every person on any divide that you can imagine is a beloved child of God and part of our mission field. When you were baptized at this font, some of you were baptized right here at Calvary in this very font, or in any waters, you were baptized, you were grafted into the body of Christ that is still about this work of showing, being the example of God's limitless love for the whole world. And by the way, you are also traced on your forehead with either waters from the baptismal font or from some special olive oil or something. The sign of the cross was traced at least on your forehead. And even though that oil or that water is long since dried, that mark of God on you is indelible. Come on, folks, what we need to do is realize that that was what should orient our whole life. Let's put aside the things like, as Peter was not thinking about following Jesus, he was thinking about his own understandings of security and influence and power. We too sometimes get caught up in that. So let's set that stuff aside. Let's get rid of the us and them. Let's get rid of the red and the blue. Let's get rid of the mask and the no mask. Let's get rid of about those who live in a poor part of the South and so they deserve the damage of a hurricane. Let's put all of that aside and put the cross of Christ in front of us. And when we say we love somebody, it just doesn't mean a warm feeling in our heart. It means we're going to get out our pocketbook and pay to help rebuild their house after a hurricane or a Derecho storm or their business being burned down in urban violence. That it's not just a warm affect, but we're going to donate food to the food pantry. We're going to pound nails in a Habitat house. We're going to welcome people here that we don't know and sit next to them within 12 feet outside, 6 feet indoors. We're going to make them feel welcomed. And if you still wonder what to do, read the Romans passage that Vicar David read earlier. Hold on to what is good, love one another warmly, be eager to show respect, don't take revenge. Paul writes on in all kinds of places, but Romans is a good place to start, Romans 12. The way of the cross. God's Spirit will direct us and lead us. It won't be easy. It got Jesus killed. But that's our calling. That's our mission. This limitless love that's available and freely given to all of God's children. That's where salvation begins. It's the here and the now, as well as the hereafter. Amen.